confirming just now it is cutting 12,000 jobs as it shrinks its power.
We've been talking to customers throughout the weekend here at IATA about the U.S. trade policies. We think we've got about a $500 million residual cost challenge.
The sound of machines that once powered American progress is fading, and with it, an era that shaped entire communities. General Electric, long considered a cornerstone of U.S. industry, has announced plans to close factories across the country and shift production overseas. What was once celebrated as a policy to protect American jobs is now unraveling into consequences few anticipated. Tariffs, designed to shield domestic industries, have instead triggered ripple effects that threaten to hollow out the very core of manufacturing. As one of America's most iconic companies makes its retreat, the question grows larger. Is this a strategic adjustment for survival in a global market, or the beginning of a slow collapse of the nation's industrial backbone? The quiet hum that once filled factory floors across the Midwest and Northeast is fading, replaced by silence. General Electric, for decades a symbol of American innovation and industrial power, has announced it will close multiple plants and move significant portions of its production overseas. For the thousands of workers who built their lives around these facilities, the news is more than the loss of a paycheck. It is the unraveling of a legacy that shaped families, communities, and the backbone of the middle class. These plants were never just assembly lines. They embodied the strength of American manufacturing, the steady rhythm of machines turning raw materials into engines, turbines, and countless products that carried the GE name across the globe. Their closure is not merely another corporate decision. It marks a turning point in the structure of global production and a stark reminder of how difficult it has become for the United States to remain competitive under its current economic and political conditions. The company has made it clear this is not a temporary measure. Operations are being restructured for long-term growth abroad, with production shifting to Mexico, Eastern Europe, and Southeast Asia. These regions offer lower labor costs, lighter tariff burdens, and governments eager to attract multinational investment. Executives stress that the strategy is not merely about cutting expenses, it is about building a supply chain resilient enough to withstand inflation, trade disputes, and the geopolitical risks that increasingly disrupt business in the United States. Beneath this move lies a deeper structural reality. While countries overseas roll out incentives to lure factories, the American industrial base has struggled to keep pace. High input costs, rigid regulations, and logistical bottlenecks have steadily eroded competitiveness. For GE, shifting production abroad means access to cheaper resources, more flexible labor pools, and modern transport hubs that make scaling operations easier and more profitable. The broader trend is unmistakable. Manufacturing is no longer confined to one nation but distributed across the globe, concentrated where conditions provide the most advantageous balance of affordability and efficiency. GE's decision stands out not only for its scale but for its symbolism. For years, companies of every size have quietly moved production overseas. But when an institution as iconic as General Electric takes such a step, it sends a signal to the entire industry. If a corporation with more than a century of experience, vast resources, and global influence cannot sustain its operations in America, smaller firms face an even harsher reality. The announcement has intensified fears that the erosion of domestic manufacturing could accelerate far more quickly than policymakers and communities are prepared to manage. The impact on local communities has been immediate and devastating. Towns built around these plants now face the loss of thousands of jobs, shrinking tax bases, and the cascading ripple effects that inevitably follow. Schools, hospitals, and public services once sustained by industrial revenue are now facing severe shortages. Local governments are scrambling to launch retraining programs and attract new investment, yet the sheer scale of the layoffs makes recovery uncertain. For families that relied on GE for stability across generations, the closures cut deeper than economics. They have stripped away a sense of pride, the pride of being part of something larger. A workforce that once stood as the foundation of American industry has been left adrift. For many, the psychological toll has been even heavier than the financial loss. General Electric was never seen as just another employer. Its name was woven into the story of American resilience, a testament to discipline, hard work, and community pride. When factory gates shut, it is not only jobs that disappear but also the belief that industry can still flourish under the promises of leaders who champion tariffs and protectionism. These closures raise doubts about whether slogans of revival can withstand the harsh realities of a global economy, where cost pressures and supply chains ultimately dictate survival. This decision is about more than factories moving abroad. It is about the shifting foundations of American industry itself. It is also about knowledge and capacity moving with them. When production lines are shipped overseas, they carry with them technical processes, supplier contracts, and decades of accumulated expertise. What is being transferred is not just equipment, but also intellectual capital and strategic advantage. Once these systems take root in other countries, they strengthen competitors while weakening America's position in industries vital to national security. The more large-scale production capacity the nation loses, the harder it becomes to remain self-sufficient in times of crisis. Within GE, this decision was not made lightly. Many plants had already slowed or sat idle as executives spent months weighing alternatives. Options included restructuring production lines, investing heavily in robotics, reducing working hours, and renegotiating contracts with unions. Forecasts were prepared for each scenario, yet none offered a path to sustained profitability. Automation delivered only temporary gains, and unions agreed to painful concessions, but the soaring costs of steel, semiconductors, and shipping proved insurmountable. Tariffs intended to protect domestic producers instead drove expenses higher, eroding margins until operating in the U.S. became nearly impossible. Other solutions proved just as unworkable. Moving to states with lower taxes and looser regulations could not offset the lack of infrastructure. Federal aid packages either fell short of the scale required or carried conditions GE could not meet across its broad product portfolio. Even with the most creative restructuring, the numbers refused to align. The conclusion became unavoidable. Maintaining production in the United States would mean long-term losses that threatened the company's very survival. For a corporation that had survived world wars, depressions, and technological revolutions, this was not a failure of innovation, it was the collapse of an operating environment too hostile for large-scale manufacturing. Global inflation, rising tariffs, and shifting supply chains converged into a force no single company could withstand. The fallout has already reshaped communities. Families who once passed GE jobs from parent to child now face unemployment. Neighborhoods where the factory whistle once set the rhythm of daily life have fallen silent. Local councils hold emergency meetings but lack the resources to replace what has been lost. Across the industrial belt, abandoned parking lots and idle machines define the new landscape. Media reports capture the decline in stark aerial footage. Silent plants, empty roads, and workers packing up their belongings after years of service. Interviews reveal even deeper scars. The loss of identity, the collapse of hope, and the fear of what comes next weigh heavily on affected communities. The policy implications are equally stark. Hardline tariffs were meant to shield American industries, yet GE's retreat exposes how fragile that strategy truly is. The notion that patriotic duty and higher consumer costs alone could sustain domestic manufacturing has proven naive. Without a comprehensive framework of long-term investment, workforce training, and infrastructure support, even the strongest industrial icons are driven to move abroad. This is not simply a story of companies abandoning their roots, it is a reflection of systemic weaknesses that demand urgent attention. The loss of identity, the collapse of hope, and the fear of what comes next weigh heavily on affected communities. The policy implications are equally stark. Hardline tariffs were meant to shield American industries, yet GE's retreat exposes how fragile that strategy truly is. The notion that patriotic duty and higher consumer costs alone could sustain domestic manufacturing has proven naive. Without a comprehensive framework of long-term investment, workforce training, and infrastructure support, even the strongest industrial icons are driven to move abroad. This is not simply a story of companies abandoning their roots, it is a reflection of systemic weaknesses that demand urgent attention. Updated financial models already suggest the company could reduce overall costs by nearly 1/5, driven by lower wages, generous tax incentives, and streamlined customs procedures in the countries selected for relocation. To hedge funds and portfolio managers, this appears to be a story of recovery and renewed competitiveness, a calculated gamble to modernize an aging manufacturing model in the face of inflation and rising input costs at home. That outlook is not unique to GE. Global capital is following similar trends, flowing toward nations that offer stable regulations and predictable trade frameworks. Vietnam, Poland, and Mexico have emerged as prime destinations, attracting investments from industries that once viewed the United States as their permanent base. In this context, GE's decision is not an isolated move but part of a broader realignment of industrial power, one that positions factories closer to growing markets, shortens delivery times, and allows products to be tailored to diverse regional demands. This flexibility is especially valuable in sectors like healthcare technology and energy systems, where local conditions often require very different solutions. Without such a shift, the outflow of production may continue until the nation no longer retains the capabilities once considered central to its strength. What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.